In our criminal justice system, sadly, there are wrongly convicted and incarcerated individuals. But the wrongfully convicted are not the problem. They're the symptom. I've got an author I'd like you to meet who believes the real problem is, as documented in his book, how they got there. Don't go anywhere. We'll hear more about his book and the writing process behind it.
Welcome to A Book Finds You podcast. This week's guest is author Shannon Bohrer. Join us as he shares the inspiration behind his book, along with his writing process, routines, and challenges. And now, here's your host, best-selling author, Rob Jolles.
Today's guest, Shannon Bohrer, served 27 years in the Maryland State Police. Following retirement, he taught at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. He holds an MBA from Frostburg State University and has been an expert witness on the use of force in both state and federal courts. He's written numerous law enforcement articles, writes a monthly column for a local newspaper, and is the author of Judicial Soup, which, by the way, just came out in May. Happy to have you with us, and welcome to the show, Shannon.
Thank you.
Good. Pleasure to have you here. Let's dive in and talk about that book of yours. And you know that the title of the show is A Book Finds You. And I just want to remind people that we say that because we don't usually go seeking a book. It kind of follows and finds us. So how did this particular book find you? And I think I've got a pretty good guess, but you tell me.
Well, I was the expert witness for Heath Patrick Thomas. He's the protagonist in the book and the victim. His lawyer hired me as an expert witness because he was charged with a minor crime. And you go through the grand jury, you go through the trial, and you go through the conviction. And I thought to myself, this is wrong. I mean, it was a wrongful conviction in my mind for obvious reasons that I lay out in the book. And I didn't know what else to do. So I started writing, thinking I'd write an article on it. And you couldn't fit it into an article, so it turned out to be a book. And that's why it was done.
Right. Wow. Has there been an update? I mean, is he incarcerated now, or is he out?
No, his case is a minor case compared to the ones you hear, in the sense that he had time served, 4 days, a fine, and then probation for a year.
Okay.
And that's the issue with his case, that we know of these serious cases where people are on death row and released after many years. And if we have multiples of them, how many minor incidents like Heath's do we have that we don't know of? Nobody ever reviews cases of his stature. They only review the larger ones, and rightfully so. I mean, if you have people on death row, you're going to look for them first and do that work. There is a number of innocent projects around this country and lawyers that do the work, but there's not enough for the people that are incarcerated for the people that claim to be innocent.
Right. So do you maintain a friendship with him, or do you have any conversation with him?
I do. We talked for a long time. The book was written over a period of 10 years. Mm-hmm. And we talked pretty regularly, and we still talk, but just a couple times a year now.
Right.
It took him a long time to adjust. He was in law enforcement for 19 years when arrested. He had a 6-year military career in the Navy. And when he went home, he had a hard time adjusting. He lives in Texas. Literally, he could not get a job, even though he had a college degree and all this background, because of his conviction, which was minor. And then he finally met a gal, and he seems to be pretty happy the last couple of years. But it took 7 or 8 years for him to get to that state, you might say.
Right. And how long did he spend in jail?
4 days.
4 days, and it took him 7 years to kind of get his footing back.
Yes, because he had a conviction. There's a lot of employment that systems that automatically eliminate you if you have a conviction on your record, automatically.
Yeah. Well, you know, Shannon, I want to applaud the fact that you've written this book, because that's something that I think gets by the public. In other words, we hear of the death row situations. We hear of the people who have committed some very serious crimes and are possibly and potentially innocent. But we never hear about somebody that spends 4 days in prison and the lifetime ramifications that can create. And so I think it's really interesting you're putting a light on that, because I actually have mentored someone who 25-year repeat offender. He's been out for about 7 or 8 years now, remarried, seems to be doing extremely well. We see, just like you, see him a couple times a year, but he was in there for a reason. He knows why he was in there. He's really tried to straighten his life out and things have been working out. But 4 days for somebody who wasn't even really, was he guilty of the crime, did you say?
They found him guilty of the crime, but that's the issue. In other words,
Right.
he should have been found innocent.
Mm,
Uh, the book outlines numerous mistakes, errors, and omissions that the court made, including not allowing evidence in that would go to his innocence. It was, for something that simple, it was assault with a weapon. He was thrown out of a bar and for complaining about not being able to pay his bill, believe it or not. And the bouncer took him out. And when the bouncer took him out, he had a gun in his waistband that came loose. And he was trying to reset the gun in the waistband. And the bouncer said that he was trying to draw the gun and point it at me.
right.
And that's the essence of the complaint.
Right.
The police did not investigate at all. They just took the bouncer's word and the bar manager. And he was with Carol, his girlfriend at the time. And she approached the police and said, "Are you going to talk to me?" And they took her name down. And then they said, "Did you see the gun come out?" She said, "No." And they turned around and left. In other words, they were only interested in finding out what happened if it fit with what the bar said happened.
Right.
The grand jury system was the same way. And then the trial, there was never really an investigation. In the book, I explained the kinesiology, how you react to an incident. And I'll give you the example I use in the book. If you have two people in the boxing ring and one throws a jab and the other parries the jab, it's not connected because you have the stimulus and you have the response, but the response is connected to the stimulus. It's comparable. If the same two people are walking down the street and one person sucker punches the other, he's going to get hit. And that's what happened in this case. The bouncer tried to say he could grab the gun before it was turned at him, and it was never turned to him. There was a whole lot wrong with this trial.
Yeah, sounds like it, Shannon. It's funny. I like bouncing to your writing process very quickly with most of our interviews, but I can't let this go for right now because it's a fascinating story. Was he legally in possession of that gun? Was that a legal firearm?
Yes, he was. He was an ICE officer at the time. He had 19 years on, and he carried the gun in his waistband as a concealable weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And that holster that he used and what he did is done by hundreds of police officers every day in this country. And while the holster is concealable, it's not good for security if you get into a wrestling match or anything like that. But yes, he could legally carry the gun. He did violate his agency policy, which is you're not supposed to drink while being armed.
Got it.
And he had a few drinks. The prosecution made him out to be a drunk. But when you add up everything in the bar tab from the dinner and where they stopped for a nightcap, and you use the calculators, BAC calculators online, you'll find out he wasn't drunk at all.
All right. Last question, possibly, although I can't let this go. Last question. What's the motivation? In other words, you've got one side that doesn't want to hear from the witness and it really seems to want to tunnel vision this case. But I'm trying to figure out what's in it for them. What is the motivation to do that? The prosecution.
In this case, the bar owner was well known in DC, a businessman, very well known. And he was violating the bar in question, and it was an historic bar in Georgetown. They were violating the ABRA rules, which is the alcohol beverage regulation. They were supposed to have 2 off-duty police officers outside and 3 security inside. They didn't have the outside security because they said it cost them too much. And they only had 1 security inside. That's what the bar owner said. Now, the bouncer that carried him out testified there were 3 of them there. And in fact, I talked to another bouncer who was downstairs when it occurred and went upstairs, and he said it was already under control, so he went back downstairs. They were trying to get around the penalties for that, I believe. In the end of the book, I was interviewing a waitress who just happened to tell me that after he was found guilty, the lawyer for the bar was coming through the bar to meet the owner and told her, we don't have to worry about that civil suit anymore, false arrest, because he was found guilty.
Okay.
So at the end of the book, you'll find several plausible reasons why they did this, but I can't say which one it was.
Right. Wow. Okay. And all right. So let's start turning to the writing process. But this isn't easy for me because you and I are going to have a cup of coffee at some point. I want to hear more about the book, but I know we've got people who want to hear about your writing process also. All right. So let's go back. Did you know you were writing a book on this, or were you just taking notes? I mean, you keeping a journal on this? How did this come to be?
Well, as expert witness, I was in the courtroom every day but 2 days. It was 8-day trial. And I took notes in the courtroom because my testimony was coming up. And as an example of what the problems with the court, I was called to the stand one day to testify. And then the judge excused me. He said they put the cart before the horse, and I was to go into the hallway. And while I was in the hallway, I didn't know what was going on. But from the transcript, I found that they were having a discussion of whether I should testify or not. As an expert witness, you can testify to what happened, not that you were there, but hypothetically. In other words, under the circumstances. The judge, however, made a rule that I was not allowed to testify until Heath testified. Now, Heath is the charged person. It's not his duty to find himself innocent. It's the state's job to find him guilty. So I thought to myself when I heard that, well, if Heath doesn't testify, does that mean I can't testify? I mean, it goes against all the rules that I'm aware of. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I just thought that's crazy. And that's just one example of many incidents, things that happen that make you question the system.
Right. Wow. Okay. So then this acorn hits you on the head and you say, you know what, I'm going to write a book. Or is that how it happened? I mean, when did you decide I'm really going to document this and get this story out?
Well, I was documenting everything as an expert. In other words, because I could testify.
Right.
And this went on for like 2.5 years.
Okay.
And in the end, Heath and I would talk on the phone, and he was very stoic about it. I mean, when he at the end of the trial, when they found him guilty and he had the right to speak, he said, I'm innocent. I didn't do this, but I'll live with it, because the court found me guilty. And that's pretty significant because most of the time a judge, when somebody says I'm innocent, they really whack them. In other words, they think you're not contrite. In this instant, he told the truth. And he said it wasn't going to affect him. Well, we would talk on the phone about what to do and what not to do. And at the time I was trying to write an article. And I said, Heath, the only thing I can think of, and that's how the decision came, is to write a book. He gave me permission to get all the documents from the attorney. And there were 3 file boxes of materials that I had to go through. And it took me, I want to say 6 months, probably longer, just to go through the file boxes, just to put everything in order so I could write it. In other words, put something on paper.
Right.
But it came about slowly. Another thing about the process, because this is a minor event, I wanted to incorporate other cases within the chapters that were similar to his. And that's when I started doing the research on these other people that were wrongfully convicted. And it didn't fit that way. So what I decided to do is to put a summary of these cases at the end of each chapter. And the summaries, if the reader reads the summaries, they'll say, well, that's like Heath's case. In other words, they'll see the similarities in many of these cases. And the cases start off not serious, but they're all serious, but not death penalty cases. But then the cases go up. So as you're reading the book, you're being fed this information that Heath's case is not unusual. It's not a one-off. It's not like he was at the wrong place at the wrong time, that this could happen to anybody.
Right.
And those cases were an eye-opener for me. Even with all my experience in law enforcement, I had no idea how many innocent people had been convicted. I always thought it was a rare and human error. And the more I researched this, the more I realized that It's not the people in the jail, it's how they got there.
Yeah.
And I say in the end of the book, if you wanted to put all these cases together, you would have a set of encyclopedias. And then you could do a new edition every year.
Right.
That's how often these things occur. It's just amazing. And we don't count the minor cases like his. We're only counting the serious cases.
Right. Right. And it's not like you were, you're working, selling copiers. So you're 27 years as a police officer.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't, you're seeing a lot of people that are sort of struggling within the system. It's amazing. All right, let's stay on your writing routine. When you gathered your information, and I'm sort of comparing this to most of us don't quite gather it that way, but once we have it, I think universally most of us try and create an outline of some sort. So you're gathering this information.
Yes.
You've got your stuff. You're starting to put it in sequence. Tell me about your writing routine. What does it look like? Were you writing daily? Do you have certain times you like to write? How do you do that?
I would write at different times, but I would write 4 or 5 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
The first draft that I wrote, and this is normal for me to write, I just throw everything in there.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a stream of consciousness. And then I know when I go back and edit it, I'm going to take some stuff out because it's duplicated, that sort of thing. But the first draft was probably 180, 190,000 words, which is, it's huge.
Yeah. Let me butt in for just a second, Shannon, so people can understand. 180,000 is about 700 pages?
Somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right, keep going. I just want to give people kind of context of what you just said.
Right.
Yeah. Then.
So what happened is I edited it and got it down to about 120, 125,000. And that's when I started doing the finishing projects on the book. In other words, I would set each chapter aside and then once a week go back and read another chapter. In other words, go back and forth and re-edit it and do it and stuff like that. And then joining the Maryland Writers Association, and you have these critique groups, and also they have the sessions at the conference where you can pitch your book. And I was told that as a first-time author, I should be limited to 80,000 words. So now I had to take the 120, 25,000 and get it down to 80,000. I worked on that for some time, and then I hired a developmental editor. And when I hired the developmental editor, I said, I have to get this down to 80,000 words. And by the time we got done with it, it actually grew a few thousand words. It was just, it's hard to tell the whole story because there's still a whole lot in the book that you don't know.
Yeah. Is there an audio book on this, Shannon?
No, there is not.
Any thoughts of doing one?
I have no idea. This is my first time. I mean, not only did I learn about writing the book when I wrote the book, I had to learn about the publishing process as well. I mean, There was just so much that I have a slide that I use in slide presentations. And on the slide, you see a fence and you see an eagle sitting on the fence and you see a cat approaching the eagle. And the title is Overconfident. And in a way, that's the way I felt at the time. I thought, well, I've written articles, I've written police manuals, and it's not a problem writing a book. Boy, was I mistaken.
Yeah, but Shannon, I got to tell you, that might have been a blessing because you didn't know what you were getting yourself into, particularly with that page count. I want to break a couple of things down that you said. First of all, now everybody has their own way, but if you had talked to me, I would have said, absolutely stick with that stream of consciousness move. I think one of the biggest mistakes that writers make, which you were what we call an unconscious competent, you sort of accidentally did it right, and not everybody does it this way. But
thank you.
Do you know how many authors never get out of the first chapter because they're constantly picking at it and pulling at it? And well, it's not done. I want to edit it. I want to fix it. You went the other way. You put blinders on and you said, I'm aiming the ship this way. This is where we're going to sail it. I'm going to write this thing. And then I'm going to come back and I'll take a look at my editing, etc. The only words I wish I could have whispered in your ear was the word count. A lot of people they look at a page count. We can't really determine the size of a book by page count. The moment you started giving me word counts, I began to cue into, okay, now how many pages this guy's talking about. Uh, so I probably would have trimmed you down right out of the gate and just said we got to net it out. But you really, for a guy who kind of didn't know what you were doing, you made a lot of really smart moves, outlining, writing routine. I want to pick one more question on that writing routine. I think you and I share this. I don't, as a writer, I don't necessarily write it Tuesdays at 8 o'clock, but a lot of writers will have a word or page count for the week, meaning I don't know where I'll be getting how many 3 days, 5 days, but I know this. I'm going to put together 5,000 words this week. And they're sort of aiming for that number a little bit. Did you have in your head a page or word count weekly, or were you just turning it loose?
No, I did not. I had retired from full time right after this. And then I was teaching part time around the country for the Justice Department. And I took my laptop with me. And as I was traveling, like I would go to the airport and sit there for an hour before the flight typing. I would type on the flight. Once I got to my location and a hotel room, I would type, and then I would type on the way back. I mean, I just, every opportunity I had, I would fill in typing, but I had no chart, no
Right,
idea of how many words I wanted to write each time.
right,
I've always written like that, even in police manuals or articles I write. If I have 1,000 words to write, I might have 2,000 or 2,500 words that I put on paper. Then I'll whittle it down. I think I'm better at editing after I see it all, and especially after I let it sit for a while.
yeah,
I
yeah,
could not have written this book in a year and a half. Well, I could have, but it wouldn't have been what it is. That's
right,
my.
yeah,
I
yeah,
look stuff I wrote 10 years ago, and I would like to edit it again right now.
right. Right. Well, I would wrestle you away from it and say, leave it, leave it. That's the way it was supposed to be.
Yes.
I don't want to talk out of both sides of my mouth, but I know as a guy, professional speaker, when I'm putting a presentation together and somebody says, you got an hour, you got 3 hours, or you got 2 days, that frees me to understand the pace that I need to go. What do I want to cover? And how am I going to fit it into that slot? And so, in hindsight, the only bug I would have put in your ear was let's aim for 80,000. Okay. Which means if you're 20,000 words and you haven't gotten out of your first chapter yet, Houston, we have a problem. So it gives us the sense of pacing. I might not be able to bring 3 cases into this chapter. I'm going to bring the best case I can into the chapter. So that's how we sort of throttle up and throttle down as writers. But like I said, you're an unconscious competent. You're just like a guy with a pretty good golf swing, but nobody really taught you how to hold the club. You just showed up and started whacking the ball down the fairway. And really, although I'm throwing some conditions at Shannon here, please understand, we all have our own style. I'm going to kind of give you the most common, but there are some tremendous authors out there who don't do anything that we're describing right now. The key is, and where Shannon and I have really landed, and I want to enforce this and make sure everyone heard it, is don't self edit as you go. Whatever that pace is, whatever that speed is, just write the book. Writing is writing, as we say. You can do a whole lot of other things, but it's just writing. That's how this man got his book out, or you'd be writing it for the rest of your life. And so I congratulate you there. For you, I'm going to zip. I normally poke a little bit more. I'm zipping to down the road a little bit. Let's talk about the marketing of the book a little. A piece that nobody likes to talk about, but
Yeah.
daggone it, particularly you, your topic. This is such an important piece that you wrote to me. You owe it to that friend of yours, others who are incarcerated in similar manners, and to the rest of us to fight to get that book heard. So, from a marketing angle, tell me some of the things that you've tried. Maybe some worked, some didn't, but give us the marketing side of this.
Well, in the proposal that I wrote for the book, I laid it all out how I would start at local bookstores and go from there. I hired a publicist out on the West Coast that was recommended by Apprentice House Press. They're the printer, and not the printer, the
Publisher.
publisher. And that started that way. And I actually stopped all that while this election was going on because everybody was so consumed with the election. And I have a list of people I'm going to contact probably starting right after Thanksgiving and then stop until after Christmas and then January. They include innocent projects. They include Jim McCloskey, who wrote a book called Framed, co-wrote the book. The Innocence Project in Philadelphia, which is made up of all the members are people that have been exonerated. In other words, trying to get into those circles to give a presentation. Now, in many ways, getting into those circles to do a presentation, you're teaching to the choir. You have to go outside that. And the remedy for this, the remedy for the whole system, is not only education so everybody knows that it could be you, but also to have changes. And those changes include responsibility for authority. If you're an officer and you do something terrible and the court sees it and they charge you with it, well, nobody looks at the supervision of the officer. Nobody looks at the training of the officer. At the same time, with these cases, there's only one case I know of, and that was a case in Texas, where the prosecutor was actually charged by his legal authorities, his legal board, and they debarred him, and then he was sentenced to 10 days in jail. Now, this is 25 years after he framed this innocent person. And at the time, this prosecutor had become a judge, so he just retired. He didn't care. And yet you had somebody in jail for 25 years, and the prosecutor, well, he was sentenced to 10 days in jail, but he only served 5. He was paroled for good behavior, believe it or not. So the people that have the responsibility and the authority are not held to their responsibility for it. And that's the issue.
Yeah.
There's a well-known case, and this is in the book also, of a police officer in New York, in Buffalo. And she's been on the job, I think, for 5 or 6 years. And she goes on a call to assist with a guy making an arrest. And the guy is handcuffed, but the officer has him in a chokehold. And she tries to intervene to say, we're not allowed to do chokeholds. And he complains about her interfering with his arrest. And there were some other officers there, and they end up charging her with some kind of violation. And she ends up being fired. Now, 15 years later, the court said, no, you give her all her back pay and her retirement. At the same time, or around that same time, this officer was actually criminally charged for assaulting somebody else. So if you're an officer in that department and you saw that and you see somebody putting a chokehold on her, are you going to say anything?
Yeah.
You know, and that's the issue. Lawyers don't want to rat out other lawyers. They don't want to say, oh, that guy's terrible. Judges don't want to do that. Nobody wants to do it.
Right.
And we have a country where whistleblowers need protection, people telling the truth.
Right.
And that's the odd part of it. How do you turn that system around? How do you hold the lawyers, the prosecutors accountable?
Right.
And I have to say also, I believe that the majority of police officers out there, the majority of prosecutors and judges do a good job.
Right.
But it only takes a small minority to really mess everything up for everybody.
Right. And I'm glad you said that. And we've certainly lived through that in the last, 4 or 5 years or so. So with some rather famous cases. Were you aware that John Grisham wrote a book? He writes fictional legal thrillers. Were you aware of the fact that he wrote one book about a man who was innocently put in prison? The book is called An Innocent Man, by the way. Did you know that?
Well, he just wrote another book called Framed.
Oh, and it's another true story?
This is co-written with McCloskey.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 10 cases in the book, including the case that I think you're talking about where the innocent man was executed in Texas.
This guy, I don't think he was executed. They ended up getting him out, but he sadly died of cancer maybe a year later. I mean, it just was very sad that he finally got the freedom he deserved, and he didn't spend more than a year outside of jail.
Yeah, most of the books when I was doing comparables for marketing, they either had one case or they had a whole lot of cases.
Yeah.
And the book I wrote, Judicial Soup, is sort of a hybrid in that you follow this one case through the whole system, from the arrest to the pretrial to the grand jury, through the trial, through the appeal. But at the same time, summaries of these other cases are interspersed behind each chapter. And that gives the reader the idea that this happens more than we realize.
Yeah.
And some of the reasons are false witness by experts, false testimony, I should say, by experts, that kind of stuff. Also, anytime they say, well, we have a jailhouse informant, it should raise a red flag right away that there's a problem with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
A number of the cases in Framed, his new book, as well as my book, they use witnesses, jailhouse informants that really didn't know anything, but they just wanted to get out.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, look, Shannon, I picked that up just watching television. I don't think I've ever seen a show on television where they went in, found somebody who had overheard this conversation, who wasn't being offered something in return, and who didn't have a history of it, by the way, of doing the same thing. And that's just me watching television. So I'm sure that happens all the time. All right, I got to bring us in for a landing here. A couple of things that you said I want people to hear. One, congratulations on hiring a publicist. That's not easy for us to do, but now you're listening to somebody who's really fighting for his book, because publicists aren't cheap. But
Yeah.
my opinion, just to throw it back at you, is I don't need necessarily the greatest hybrid publisher and different moves like that, where I've got to put a lot of money into the production of a book. I want to save whatever budget I have for just what you did, which is hiring that publicist. Now, step number 2 is hiring a good one. And believe me, nobody has out on their in their advertisement, I'm not so good, but hire me anyway. So really network, make sure that you've vetted out the person that you're working with. And it's not a coincidence that you might see Shannon on the Today Show, or Shannon in Publishers Weekly, or his book getting around. But Publishers Weekly won't take a phone call from me or you, and neither will the Today Show. So that's where a publicist comes in. So I just think that was a really smart move, and many people don't have the stomach for it. I do. It's far too hard to write a book, and I'm not writing a book that I think has as much consequence as your book. I'm teaching people frequently how to sell or how to market. I think it's really important, Shannon, but I don't think it's as important as your book. And anyway, and I congratulate you. His book's called, just so you know where to go get it from Amazon and where to write a nice review, the book is called Judicial Soup. And so check that book out. And how do people get a hold of you, Shannon?
Well, you can go to shannonbohrer.com. It's a web page.
Spell that name out just in case.
I'm sorry?
Spell that name of yours out.
Oh, it's ShannonBohrer.com.
Good.
And there's an email on there that you can contact me. And there's a description of the book and a little background and stuff like that. It's a simplistic web page. It's not complicated. But I'm not a technical person for that.
Right. But Shannon, again, how many authors I'm talking to who don't have a web page? You've got to have a web page. You've got to have a place for people to find you. So yes. You're walking the walk. For a guy who's written his first book, normally we learn that about the third book. But you're not wasting any time with this. Built himself a website. We're always working on our websites, but got himself a place to be found and the book to be found, working with a publicist, following a writing process. Most importantly, when we talk about A Book Finds You, writing about something that he has passion for. We don't just write a book. The reason why he finds us is because we got to wake up with that burn in our belly and say, I have to write this. I don't know where it's going, but I got to write it. You walk the walk, my friend. And it's really been a pleasure getting to know you. hearing about your book, a little bit about your writing process. I couldn't get away from the book. So that's a very good sign. And anyway, just grateful to have had you on the show. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you, sir.
You bet. Well, we'll do it again as well as we can next time. Until then, everybody, stay safe.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's guest author, we'd love you to rate, review, and share this episode with others. If you'd like more information on today's guest or the Maryland Writers Association, please visit our website at marylandwriters.org. You can also find out about the history of the Maryland Writers Association by listening to our first podcast, Episode 0.